I 28M always knew my mom favored my sisters, 32F and 30F, but I never expected her to actually admit it in front of the entire family. Growing up, it was obvious. My sisters got the hugs, the encouragement, the excitement over their achievements. Me? I was an afterthought. If I asked why things were different, I was imagining things. If I pushed back, I was too sensitive. It wasn't just small things either, it was everything. Rules in our house were completely different depending on who you were. My sisters could stay out as late as they wanted, but I had a strict curfew. They could go to sleepovers, take dance classes, skip chores. I had a laundry list of responsibilities, and got yelled at if I didn't follow every rule to the letter. If I tried to bring it up, my dad would shrug and say, "That's just how moms and sons are." He never got involved. Ever, no matter how obvious the favoritism was. By the time I was in school, it became a pattern I couldn't ignore. Every time my sisters had a recital, a parent-teacher conference, or even a casual school event, my mom was there. She clapped the loudest, brought flowers, took pictures. I played soccer for 3 years. She never came to a single game. Not one. I remember my coach pulling me aside once and asking if everything was okay at home because I was the only kid whose parents never showed up. It wasn't just school. It was birthdays, holidays, everything. One Christmas, my sisters got expensive gifts, designer clothes, a new laptop. I got socks. When I asked why, my mom sighed and said, "You're a boy, what do you even want?" She always had a way of making me feel like the problem. If I said anything about how she treated me, she'd roll her eyes and say I was being dramatic. I learned pretty quickly that nothing I said would change anything. The college situation was the final proof I needed. My parents paid for both my sisters' tuition in full when it was my turn. Sorry, we don't have the money for that. When I asked why they could afford my sister's tuition but not mine, my dad sighed and muttered something about how my mom handled the finances. I pushed for an answer, but he just shrugged it off like it wasn't his concern. At 25, I finally snapped. My mom had made excuse after excuse for why she couldn't come to my graduation. "It's too far. I'm too busy." Then I found out she had flown out to my sister's engagement party that same week. I confronted her, and instead of apologizing, she said, "It's not a big deal. You're overreacting." That was the moment I started pulling back. I stopped calling as often, only visiting for major holidays. If she didn't want to be in my life, I wasn't going to force her to be. Even then, my girlfriend 26F noticed things I had spent my entire life trying to ignore. She saw how my mom barely acknowledged me when we visited, how she lit up around my sisters but barely made eye contact with me. After one family dinner, she asked, "Does she even like you?" It was a fair question. The real breaking point happened at a recent family dinner. I wasn't even planning to bring it up. I had accepted a long time ago that my mom just didn't care about me the way she did my sisters. But that night, something in me snapped. Maybe it was watching her dote on my older sister's kids while barely acknowledging me. Maybe it was just years of frustration boiling over. I asked, straight up, "Why do you treat me so differently?" The table went silent. My dad looked down at his plate. My younger sister shifted uncomfortably. My older sister rolled her eyes, and my mom, she sighed, put down her fork, and said, "Because I never wanted a son." It was like the air got sucked out of the room. No one said anything. Even my older sister, the golden child, looked stunned. My mom didn't even seem to realize what she had just admitted. She just took another sip of her wine, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I got up. I didn't say anything. I just grabbed my coat and left. My girlfriend followed, and as soon as we got in the car, everything hit me at once. Every unanswered question from my childhood suddenly made sense. The distance, the coldness, the way she treated me like I was nothing compared to my sisters. She never wanted me, and she never even tried to hide it. That was the moment everything changed. The silence at the dinner table stretched on longer than it should have. My mother had just dropped the words like they meant nothing. Because I never wanted a son, nobody moved, nobody spoke. Even my older sister, who always defended her, didn't say a word. My dad cleared his throat, but he didn't look up from his plate. My younger sister stared at our mom, like she was seeing her for the first time. My mom didn't backtrack, didn't try to soften it. She just kept eating like nothing had happened. When my younger sister finally muttered, "Mom, what the hell?" she just waved her off. "I always imagined having daughters," she said, like she was talking about redecorating the house. Not about how she had emotionally neglected one of her children for nearly 3 decades. "She's always treated you that way. Why are you making a big deal about it now?" she said, rolling her eyes. "You turned out fine, that was enough." I pushed my chair back and got up. My girlfriend followed without hesitation. Nobody stopped me. My dad sighed and finally spoke up. That's just how your mother is. I walked out. We got into the car, and as soon as the door shut, the weight of it all hit me at once. Every single thing made sense now. Every ignored school event, every cold response, every time she made me feel like I was a burden while my sisters got to be the golden children. She had never wanted me, and she hadn't even bothered to hide it. She just didn't expect me to put it together out loud. I gripped the steering wheel, not even turning the car on. My girlfriend sat beside me, giving me space, but I could feel her watching me. After a long moment, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not crazy," she said. "I've noticed it too. It shouldn't have felt validating, but it did." Later that night, my phone buzzed, a message from my younger sister. "I always knew she treated you differently, but I never thought she'd outright admit it like that." That was the thing. She had always known something was off too. She just never questioned it. She had been given love, support, attention. The imbalance had been obvious, but it had been easier for everyone to pretend it wasn't happening. My older sister didn't text, not that I expected her to. My dad called the next day. I let it go to voicemail, but he left a message anyway. "Your mother didn't mean it like that. You know how she is. She's old-fashioned. Some women just don't connect with sons the way they do with daughters." He hesitated. "I tried talking to her about it when you were younger, but she never changed. I just thought maybe one day she'd come around. Old-fashioned, like neglecting your kid was just another outdated tradition, like having a landline or recording TV shows on VHS tapes." I didn't call back. Over the next few days, I told a few close friends about what happened. Every single one of them was horrified. "Dude, if my mom ever said that to me, I'd never speak to her again. That's actually insane. How does she not even care? You should just cut her off, man. Seriously." It wasn't like I hadn't thought about it. I had spent years pretending things weren't as bad as they were, convincing myself that maybe I was just overreacting. But now, there was no pretending anymore. She had ripped the illusion away herself, and the worst part, she still hadn't reached out. No apology, no explanation, nothing. I barely slept that week. Every night, I replayed the moment over and over in my head, because I never wanted a son. The way she had said it, casual, unbothered, like it wasn't a confession, just a statement of fact. By the end of the week, I knew I needed to hear it again. Not with a dinner table full of people. Not after a couple of glasses of wine. Sober, direct, one-on-one. I needed her to say it to my face. So I called her. For the first time since that night, she actually picked up. "Can we meet for coffee?" She didn't even ask why. Just gave me a time and place, like we were scheduling a business meeting. It was time to get my answer. The coffee shop was quiet when I walked in. Afternoon lull. A few people scattered around, heads down over laptops, or lost in their own conversations. My mother was already there, sitting near the window, a small cup of coffee in front of her. She wasn't looking around for me, just staring out at the street like she had nothing pressing on her mind. When I pulled out the chair across from her, she didn't acknowledge me. No greeting, no tension, just business as usual. I didn't waste time. "Did you really never want a son?" She didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. Just turned her gaze back to me, and shrugged. It wasn't my plan. It was so casual, like she was talking about a dinner reservation that got mixed up. I asked why. She stirred her coffee, not in a nervous way, more like she was bored of the conversation already. I just always imagined daughters. No hesitation, no second guessing. Just saying it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I pressed again. "You had me. Why didn't you at least try?" Another shrug. She wasn't defensive. She wasn't emotional. "I don't know. I never connected with you. It just wasn't the same." Then came the part that made everything even worse. "Your dad wanted to try for a boy. I was fine with just the girls. But he pushed for one more." The words sat between us for a moment. She sipped her coffee, watching me, like she was waiting for me to accept the answer and move on. "I didn't. You treated me differently my entire life because I wasn't the kid you wanted." No denial, just another sip of coffee. It wasn't personal. Not personal. Years of favoritism. Coldness. Absence. That wasn't personal. She tapped her nails on the table, already looking restless. "I don't see why you're so upset. It's not like I abused you." I sat back in my chair. "So what now? You expect me to just forget it?" She gave a small, tired sigh. "I think we should move on. There's no point holding on to this." Like it was something we could sweep under the rug. Like she hadn't just confirmed everything I had ever suspected. I shook my head. "I can't do that." She barely reacted at first. But as weeks passed with no calls from me, she started trying to get in touch. First through my dad, then through relatives, dropping hints that I was being dramatic. When I didn't budge, she finally sent a short text. "Are you done sulking yet?" That was it. No argument. No attempt to change my mind. Just dismissal. I stood up. She didn't watch me leave. That night my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. When I played it back, his voice was low, tired. I know your mother isn't perfect, but you don't need to make this a bigger deal than it is. She has her ways, but deep down, she still cares. Don't overreact. I deleted the message. The next day, my older sister texted. Mom told me about your little coffee shop meltdown. You're seriously still mad? It's just how she is. That line again. The same excuse. Like her treatment of me was some personality quirk. Not years of neglect. I didn't respond. My younger sister called later that night. She sighed. I always knew she treated you differently, but I thought it was just a personality thing. I didn't think it was this bad. Now I don't think I can look at her the same way. She didn't try to defend my mom. She didn't tell me to get over it. She just acknowledged it. I don't blame you for walking away. That was all I needed to hear. I blocked my mother's number. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it. I typed out the message, stared at it for a second, then hit send. I can't keep pretending we have a relationship. Take care. That was it. No anger. No long explanation. Just the truth. The message was delivered. No reply. I went straight to my contacts and blocked her number. Then my older sister's. There was no point in keeping that door open. I already knew she would try to guilt trip me into forgiving our mom. It took less than a minute to cut them off. A lifetime of tension, gone with a few taps on a screen. Later that day, my dad sent a text. I hope you reconsider, but I won't push you. Nothing else. No attempt to understand. No taking responsibility. Just another passive message to avoid conflict. I left it on read. A few days passed, and for the first time in my life, my phone wasn't buzzing with family messages. No invites. No group chats. Just silence. Except from my younger sister. She called the next night. I know this isn't easy, but I support you. She wasn't taking sides, wasn't telling me what to do. Just letting me know she understood. It was the first time someone in my family actually acknowledged it. A week later, the messages started rolling in. An uncle. You need to call your mother. She's heartbroken. Another relative, who had been mostly silent up to this point, finally spoke up. Look, I'm not saying she's perfect, but she was always different with you. We all saw it. I just never knew what to say. Another uncle. You're being dramatic. She's your mother. It didn't take long to figure out why. My older sister had been busy. She went around telling everyone that I disowned mom over one bad conversation, left out the years of favoritism, the college tuition, the missed milestones, the way she literally admitted she never wanted me. She made it sound like I was punishing our mom for a slip of the tongue. Then an aunt, one I had never been particularly close with, reached out. I don't blame you. I always saw how she treated you differently. We all did. We just never said anything. It hit harder than I expected. Someone else had noticed. Someone outside my siblings and dad? I asked why no one ever said anything. Because it wasn't my place. That was it. Everyone saw it. Nobody spoke up. The guilt still crept in. Every now and then, I'd catch myself wondering if I had overreacted. If I had made a mistake. My girlfriend noticed. You need to talk to someone about this. She wasn't wrong. I booked a therapy session. The first session wasn't easy. I laid everything out. How she ignored me growing up. How she refused to show up for me. How she admitted she never wanted me. How everyone expected me to just accept it. The therapist didn't hesitate. That's emotional neglect. She explained how it leaves scars just like any other form of mistreatment. How it rewires your brain into thinking you need to earn basic love and respect. You're not crazy for walking away. You're protecting yourself. That was the first time I felt like I wasn't imagining things. My dad reached out again, wanted to meet up, said he didn't want to reopen old wounds, just wanted things to go back to normal. I ignored the message. Then my older sister sent a long message, a full paragraph about how I was ruining the family over nothing, how I was being selfish, how I needed to think about mom's feelings. Before I blocked her, I sent one last reply. She never thought about mine. Blocked. December rolled around. Christmas invitations usually came early, but my phone stayed silent. My younger sister called a few days before. Are you coming? No. She hesitated. I don't think I am either. Instead, I spent Christmas with my girlfriend's family. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an argument to start. I wasn't walking on eggshells. I just existed. It was the most peaceful holiday I'd ever had. A few weeks after Christmas, my phone buzzed with a call from my younger sister. It wasn't our usual check-in. Her voice was tense, like she was debating whether to even say what was on her mind. I found something. She finally said, you need to hear this. She had been going through some old boxes in our parents' attic, mostly looking for childhood photos. Instead, she found a bundle of letters, handwritten, folded neatly, stuffed inside an old shoebox. My sister wondered why they were still there, why mom never threw them away. Maybe she forgot about them. Maybe she never thought anyone would find them. Or maybe deep down she had wanted someone to see the truth. Letters our mother had written to a friend while she was pregnant with me. They weren't sentimental. They weren't excited. They were full of resentment. Letter after letter, our mom vented about how she did not want a boy. I just know I won't connect with him. I feel nothing for this baby. If it's another girl, I'll be happy. If it's a boy, I don't know what I'll do. It didn't stop there. After I was born, she kept writing. I don't feel anything when I hold him. It's like he isn't even mine. I love my girls so much, but I don't have the same feeling for him. She had admitted everything in those letters, long before I was old enough to notice the difference. Long before I started questioning whether I was just imagining things. And then came the worst part. She hadn't even wanted a third child. The only reason she got pregnant again was because my dad insisted on trying for a boy. I had never questioned why I was the only one treated differently. Not really. I had assumed my mother was just wired that way, that she had her favorites, that maybe I just wasn't the kid she wanted. I had never considered that my entire existence was forced on her, that she resented me before I was even born. I asked my younger sister to send me pictures of the letters. I read them over and over, watching the words blur together. She hesitated before telling me she had confronted our dad about them. He already knew. He admitted he had known since the beginning. He knew she hadn't wanted another child, knew she had no interest in raising a son, knew exactly how she felt about me. He had hoped she would warm up to me over time. That was his excuse. That was what he told himself for nearly 3 decades, while standing by and doing nothing. I called him. He answered immediately, like he had been expecting it. I asked if he had ever once considered stopping her, if he had ever thought to step in, if he had even tried to make sure I was treated half as well as my sisters. He sighed, said he didn't want to reopen wounds, said he thought she would get over it. She never did. And he never cared enough to change anything. I asked about the college money, because I had believed him when he told me they just couldn't afford to pay for my tuition. I had taken out loans. I had struggled. Meanwhile, my sisters had their entire education covered. When I finally confronted my dad about it, he just shook his head and said, "Your mother said we couldn't afford it for all 3 of you." I didn't question it. It wasn't until now that I realized he never even tried to fight for me. He paused, said something about how my mother controlled the finances more than he did. Said she had convinced him there wasn't enough for all 3 of us, that I didn't need help the way they did. Another lie. She had deliberately cut me off. Chosen my sisters over me again and again, while my dad just stood by and watched. When I told my girlfriend, she was furious. This wasn't just neglect, this was intentional. She wasn't wrong. Every single thing I had doubted, every time I had wondered if I was being too sensitive, every moment I had second-guessed myself, it had all been real. My therapist didn't hesitate when I brought it up in our next session. You can't force accountability from people who refuse to take it. There was no fixing this. No getting an apology that meant anything. No moment of realization where my parents would suddenly understand what they had done. I had been hoping, deep down, that my father would at least try to make things right. Instead, all he had done was prove he was just as guilty as her. I called him one last time, told him he had failed me as a parent, told him I wasn't just cutting off my mother, I was done with both of them. He didn't argue, didn't beg me to reconsider, just sighed and muttered something about regretting this later. I hung up, blocked his number. My younger sister stopped talking to our mom after reading the letters, said she couldn't look at her the same way. Said she needed time. Our mother never even reached out to ask why. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I wasn't hoping for closure. A month passed, no contact, no texts, no last-minute attempts from my dad to fix things. Nothing. If my mother cared that I was gone, she didn't show it. The only time my name even came up was when people started asking her where I was. Instead of telling the truth, she started rewriting the story. My aunt, the same one who had admitted she always saw how differently I was treated, called me one afternoon. She was blunt. "Your mom is telling people you're going through something and taking it out on the family." Apparently, the new version of events was that I had overreacted to something small, gotten emotional, and decided to cut everyone off out of nowhere. She made it sound like a temporary tantrum, like at any moment I'd snap out of it and come crawling back, full of apologies. She wasn't heartbroken. She wasn't sad. She was annoyed. Annoyed that people kept asking her about it. Meanwhile, my younger sister started visiting less. At first she still stopped by, still answered calls, but something had shifted. My mother noticed, and she did not like it. She started planting seeds, telling my sister that I had always been dramatic, that I had always been distant, that I was the one breaking the family apart. It was gaslighting in real time. My sister didn't buy it. She told me later that every time she went over there, it felt off. Like she wasn't visiting a mom who missed her son. She was visiting someone who wanted to control the narrative. Therapy helped me see it for what it was. This wasn't new behavior. It had always been there. I had just stopped making excuses for it. Then, one night my sister called. She had just left our mother's house. For the first time in her life, she had seen it clearly. It had started small. My mother brought me up again, complained that I was selfish, that I didn't appreciate everything she did. My sister pushed back. Like what? Silence. Then the excuses. The usual guilt tripping. The twisting of the facts. But this time, my sister didn't let it go. She pointed out how our mother had always treated me differently, how she had never even tried to be in my life, how even now she wasn't showing any signs of actually caring that I was gone. That's when my mom snapped. She accused my sister of choosing me over the family. That was the breaking point. My sister saw it, really saw it. For the first time, it wasn't just about me. It was control, and suddenly my sister realized it had always been there. Even toward her. It didn't take long for my mother to shift targets. She turned on my dad next. Blamed him for the family falling apart. Said it was his fault that I had turned against her. Like he was some mastermind behind all of this. Like he had that kind of spine. My older sister, of course, stayed loyal. Doubled down. Defended our mom. She's always been this way was the excuse. Again, like that somehow made it okay. Then the desperation kicked in. My mother started calling my younger sister non-stop. Suddenly she cared, not about me, not about fixing anything. She cared that she was losing control. Fix things. That's what she kept demanding. Like my sister was supposed to be the family glue. Like it was her job to bring me back. Instead, my sister stopped answering. Low contact. Space, not a full cutoff, but the beginning of one. Then my dad reached out to her, not to check on her, not to ask how she was handling all of this, just to get her to talk to him. She refused. For the first time in our lives, my sister and I were actually talking. Not just small talk. Not just updates. Real conversations. She told me about mom's control, the guilt tripping, the emotional manipulation. She told me about how different she felt now that she had stepped back. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. The first sign that something was brewing came from a family friend, a text. You might want to know what's being said about you. Then a follow-up. Your mom had a breakdown at a family gathering. She was crying about how you abandoned her. Apparently, it had happened at some relative's birthday party. My mother, surrounded by sympathetic ears, going on about how her ungrateful son had cut her off for no reason. She played it up. The heartbroken mother act. Talked about how she had always been a good mother, and how I had twisted things to make her look bad. It worked. Some people ate it up. Others weren't so sure. And then my older sister stepped in. She backed my mother completely. Told anyone who would listen that I had always been mentally unstable, and that my girlfriend was manipulating me into hating our mom. She rewrote the story in real time. He's just punishing mom because she missed his graduation. He's always been difficult. This is all his girlfriend's fault. She made me sound like some unstable puppet, being controlled by the woman I've been with for years. It spread fast. Then my dad texted, "Let's just meet and clear the air." No acknowledgement of what was happening. No recognition of the fact that my own sister was helping spread lies about me. Just a vague attempt to smooth things over without taking a side. I didn't reply. My younger sister was furious. She started confronting people who had fallen for my mother's act, telling them how things really were. She called out the lies in real time. You really think he's doing this over a missed graduation? But my mother wasn't done. She started guilt-tripping my younger sister through text. If you loved me, you wouldn't turn your back on me like your brother did. You're all I have left. It didn't work. If anything, it pushed my sister further away. A few cousins reached out. Some were cautious. Hey, I heard something about you and your mom. What's going on? Others were blunt. Dude, why are you punishing her? I didn't argue. I sent screenshots. The ones where my mother admitted she never wanted a son. The ones where my father admitted he knew the whole time. One cousin texted back almost immediately. Holy sasterisk. It caused a massive family divide. Some people couldn't ignore the proof. They saw the messages, the evidence, the years of mistreatment. Others, they refused to believe it. They clung to the version of my mother they had always known. The one that was loving, kind, incapable of what I was saying. Your mom would never say that. That has to be fake. Maybe she made mistakes, but she still loves you. Denial. Full force. Then my older sister blocked me. No warning, no argument, just completely cut me off. Not that I was surprised. She had never been on my side. My dad reached out one last time, told me I was overreacting. Told me that deep down my mother loved me in her own way. I told him the truth. That's not love. I haven't heard from him since. Through all of it, my girlfriend was the only steady thing. She saw everything happening, watched the smear campaign unfold and kept me grounded. Every time I second-guessed myself, she reminded me, "You're not crazy. You're not the bad guy." Then my younger sister hit her limit. She called me, voice tense. I told mom I need space. She had stepped back. Not full no contact, but the beginning of it. And my mother? She didn't even fight for her. That's when my sister finally understood. It was never about love. It was about control. Despite all of the chaos, the lies, the guilt tripping. For the first time I felt relief, because now, I knew I never had to go back. Months passed. The silence was almost unsettling. No texts, no calls, no sudden attempts to fix things. Until one afternoon, out of nowhere, my phone lit up with a long message from my mother. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't even particularly apologetic. Just a carefully worded paragraph about how she regretted how things turned out. She didn't admit to anything. She didn't acknowledge what she had done. Just, I never meant to hurt you. And I don't want things to be like this. No specifics. No ownership. Just vague regret, not for her actions, but for the consequences. A few days later, my dad reached out. This time, it wasn't an attempt to smooth things over. It was pity. Your mom is struggling. She's really down. She says it's your fault. Not that she misses me. Not that she understands what she did, just that she's upset and needs someone to blame. I called my younger sister. She already knew about the message. Our mother had reached out to her too, though the tone had been completely different. Less apologetic. More annoyed. I don't know why he's being so stubborn. This has gone on long enough. She didn't miss me. She missed having control over me. My sister warned me. She's just trying to reel you back in. She was right. Then my mother tried a new tactic. Money. A bank transfer out of nowhere. Labeled for tuition. She hadn't helped when I actually needed it. Hadn't cared when I was drowning in student loans, while my sisters got a free ride. But now, suddenly, she wanted to fix it. No explanation. No conversation. Just money. I sat with it for a while. On one hand, it felt like the least she could do. A form of repayment for years of neglect. On the other, it felt like a bribe. Like she was trying to buy her way out of taking accountability. My therapist didn't hesitate. A real apology comes with ownership, not damage control. This wasn't about making things right. This was about avoiding the consequences of her own actions. I sent my own message. If you want a real relationship, you need to acknowledge what you did and why. Her response came almost immediately. Not remorse. Not understanding. Defensiveness. I'm trying. You're just holding on to the past. There it was. No growth. No real change. Just the same deflection. I rejected the money. Told her I didn't want her money. I wanted honesty. She refused to give it. Then my dad tried one last time. She's your mother. You'll regret this one day. I had heard it before. I wasn't falling for it again. My younger sister made her choice. After watching our mother refuse to take responsibility, she finally cut her off too. No more, maybe I'll give her another chance. No more hesitation. Full no contact. That was it. No more second chances. No more waiting for something that was never going to come. I blocked my mother permanently. She would never truly change. And now, I didn't need her to. A year passed. No contact. No drama. No last-minute guilt trips. For the first time in my life, I felt free. My mother was officially out of my life. My father and older sister, still pretending nothing happened. They had dug their heels in, refused to acknowledge the truth. In their minds, I was the problem. The ungrateful son who had abandoned his poor mother over something small. Except it wasn't small, and it never had been. My younger sister had changed the most. She had gone from hesitant to fully cutting our mom off. One day, she just stopped answering. No big fight. No dramatic goodbye. She just let go. And she was happier. For the first time, she wasn't being guilt-tripped. She wasn't constantly trying to fix things. And just like that, she started to feel lighter. Without the weight of my mother hanging over me, my life actually started moving forward. No more wondering if I was good enough. No more trying to earn something that was never going to be given. I was finally living on my own terms. Through everything, my girlfriend had been my constant. The one person who never made me doubt myself. Never made me question whether I had overreacted. She saw the truth before I did. And she stood by me when my own family wouldn't. I started thinking about proposing, not because I needed her to complete me, but because I finally understood what real love looked like. Real love isn't something you have to beg for. It's given freely. And for the first time, I realized I had it. My dad tried one last time. A simple message. One day you'll understand your mother was doing her best. I didn't respond, because I already understood. She wasn't doing her best. She never wanted me, and she never even tried to hide it. The holidays came, and I spent them with my girlfriend's family again. No tension. No fake smiles. No walking on eggshells. Just acceptance. For once, I wasn't the outsider. For once, I wasn't the kid waiting to be loved. I belonged. Through the grapevine, I heard my mother still complains about me. Still plays the victim. Still tells people I'm going through a phase, and I'll come back one day. She's wrong. I'm never going back. Cutting her off was the hardest thing I ever did, but now I finally understand the power of letting go. Toxic people don't deserve access to your life just because you share DNA. For years, I had been searching for something: validation, closure, acknowledgement. I don't need any of it anymore, because I finally know the truth. It was never about me. It was always about her. Hey everyone, I'm a 27-year-old guy who just landed a great job after years of barely making it by. This is supposed to be a huge win for me, but instead, it's turned into an absolute nightmare. I need to get this off my chest because I can't even wrap my head around what's happening right now. Buckle up, because this is a wild one. So, a bit of background: I grew up in a pretty average household. We weren't poor, but we definitely weren't rolling in cash either. My parents always told me they believed in my potential and encouraged me to go to college. They said they'd support me however they could, but when it came time to pay for tuition, it became clear they didn't have much saved up. No big deal, right? I took out student loans, worked part-time jobs, and hustled my way through school. It wasn't easy, but I made it through, and that's what matters. After college, I struggled to find a job in my field. For a few years, I worked odd jobs, lived paycheck to paycheck, and barely kept my head above water. My parents were aware of this and would sometimes offer me words of encouragement, but financially, they couldn't or wouldn't help me out. I never held it against them because I knew they had their own bills and issues. Fast forward to this year, I finally got a break. I landed a high-paying job in tech, and it feels like all the hard work and stress finally paid off. For the first time in my life, I'm not worried about my next rent payment. I've been able to pay off a huge chunk of my student loans, start saving for a house, and even treat myself a bit. It feels amazing, like I'm finally stepping into adulthood on solid ground. I was so excited, and of course I shared the good news with my parents. They seemed genuinely happy for me, or so I thought. A few days after I told them about my new job, I get this massive text from my mom. At first, I thought it was just a heartfelt congratulations message. You know, the kind of proud parent stuff you'd expect. But then I kept reading. It quickly turned into something else entirely. She started listing out all these expenses they supposedly paid for throughout my life. Everything from diapers and baby formula to school supplies, field trips, and even family vacations we took when I was a kid. It was itemized like a bill you'd get from a restaurant, except this wasn't for a fancy dinner. It was for my entire childhood. I scrolled through, absolutely stunned. At the end of the message, she added it all up and wrote, "This is what we've spent on you. We think it's only fair you start paying us back now that you're successful." My jaw hit the floor. I mean, who does this? I honestly thought it was some kind of joke. Like maybe they were poking fun at how expensive kids are. So I called her up half laughing and asked if she was serious. The tone of her voice when she answered told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't joking. She doubled down immediately, saying that they sacrificed so much for me, and it's only fair I repay the investment they made in my upbringing. She even used the word investment. I tried to keep my cool, but I was seriously freaking out inside. I reminded her that parents are supposed to take care of their kids. That's just what you sign up for when you decide to have children. But she kept insisting, saying it's time for me to show my gratitude now that I'm financially stable. The next morning, I woke up to an email from my dad. It was a spreadsheet, yes, a literal spreadsheet, with a detailed breakdown of every cent they claimed to have spent on me since I was born. The total? Over $200,000. It had everything listed: hospital bills from my birth, kindergarten fees, high school sports equipment, even Christmas presents. I felt like I was in some kind of surreal nightmare. I showed it to my girlfriend, and she was just as shocked as I was. She couldn't believe my parents were actually asking me to pay this back. As if that wasn't enough, later that day, my aunt called me out of the blue. She told me she'd heard about the situation from my mom and said I needed to be more grateful. She went on about how much my parents did for me, and how it's only right I start giving back now that I'm in a good place financially. I didn't know what to say. It felt like the walls were closing in on me. My dad called me that evening, and instead of backing down, he brought up legal action. He said they'd been keeping records all these years and that they had a case. He wasn't yelling or anything. He was almost calm, like this was a business transaction. He even suggested I take out a loan if I couldn't pay them back immediately. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My girlfriend is furious and told me this is beyond manipulative. It's emotional blackmail. She's been telling me not to give in, but part of me feels guilty. I know it sounds ridiculous, but they've got me doubting myself. Did I miss something? Is this actually normal, and I'm just the ungrateful son who doesn't want to pay back his parents? I decided to put this out here because I honestly don't know what to do. I feel trapped and lost, and any advice would be appreciated. Has anyone else ever dealt with something like this? I thought my parents were proud of me, but now it feels like they see me as a walking ATM. Update 1. Alright, here's the update. After all the texts, the spreadsheet, and calls from my aunt, I decided I needed to confront my parents face to face. I thought maybe this was just some huge misunderstanding. They've never been this intense about money before, so I convinced myself they'd see how ridiculous this was once we talked it out. I arranged to meet them at their house. As soon as I walked in, I noticed the vibe was off. My mom was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open, and my dad was pacing around the living room. It felt like they were preparing for a business meeting, not a family discussion. I sat down, trying to keep things casual, but they got straight to the point. They asked if I had reviewed the spreadsheet and if I was ready to start making payments. I told them I was confused. I said that parents are supposed to provide for their kids, and this wasn't normal. I brought up the fact that they always told me they were proud of me and supported my career. I asked why they were doing this now. My mom cut me off, saying it wasn't about support, it was about fairness. They started saying how much they had sacrificed for me, how they put their own dreams on hold so I could go to college and have a good life. Then they compared me to my cousins. They said, look at your cousins, they're helping their parents out. Why can't you do the same? That really got me, because I know for a fact my cousins only chip in because their parents have real financial struggles. My parents don't. They live comfortably, have a paid-off house, and have always splurged on vacations and new gadgets. It's not like they're broke. I pointed this out, but they acted like I was making excuses. It escalated from there. They accused me of being ungrateful, saying I didn't appreciate everything they'd done for me. My dad started listing out things they'd given up, trips they didn't take, hobbies they didn't pursue, all because of me. It felt like they were trying to rewrite our entire family history, making it seem like raising me was some kind of financial burden they never wanted. I tried to reason with them. I pulled out my phone and showed them my budget, explaining that I'm still paying off student loans and can't afford to give them $200,000. I thought maybe seeing the numbers would make them understand. But instead, they just suggested I take out another loan. They said it was my responsibility to repay them and that I'd be able to handle the extra payments since I'm earning so much now. Then came the ultimatum. They told me I had a year to pay them back in full. If I didn't, they'd go public with the sacrifices they made and let everyone know I refused to repay my debts. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They made it sound like they'd go around telling everyone I was some deadbeat son who used his parents and then abandoned them once he got rich. I got out of there as fast as I could. When I got back home, I told my girlfriend everything. She was shocked and said this was clearly emotional blackmail. She offered to help cover any legal fees if my parents actually tried to take this to court. She insisted I shouldn't pay them a cent. It was the first time I started to really consider that maybe she was right, that this wasn't just a disagreement, it was manipulation. A few days later, my aunt showed up at my apartment unannounced. She didn't even give me a heads up, just knocked on my door like she was there to deliver some urgent message. I let her in, and she immediately launched into a speech about how my parents were heartbroken, how they'd done so much for me, and how it was my duty to keep the peace by paying them back. That's when it hit me. My parents had already started turning the family against me. They'd called my aunt, probably everyone else too, painting me as the ungrateful son who's refusing to help his poor parents. After she left, I made a post on Reddit asking for advice because I was feeling completely lost. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of comments poured in, all saying the same thing, that this was not normal and that my parents were being manipulative. Some people suggested I go no contact immediately, while others even recommended getting a restraining order if the harassment continued. The more I read, the more I started to see the situation clearly. I realized this wasn't an isolated incident. My parents have always used guilt and pressure to control me, but this was just the most extreme example. It was like a light bulb went off. I decided I needed help to navigate this mess. So I booked an appointment with a therapist. In therapy, I started unpacking everything. The therapist pointed out patterns I hadn't noticed before, how my parents always used guilt to get what they wanted, how they made me feel like I owed them for things that are just part of normal parenting. It was eye-opening and honestly hard to swallow, but it made me more determined to protect myself. A few days after the therapy session, I started gathering all the evidence I could. I saved the text messages, the emails, the absurd spreadsheet, everything. I figured if they're going to threaten legal action, I need to be prepared. Just when I thought things couldn't get weirder, a package arrived at my door. It was from my parents, no note, just a framed collage of photos from my childhood. It looked like something you'd give as a sentimental gift, except this wasn't that. It was like a twisted reminder of everything they'd done for me. There was a sticky note on the back with one sentence, "This is what you're throwing away." That was my breaking point. I realized I have to make a choice. Either keep playing their game and lose my sanity, or cut them off completely and protect myself. For the first time, I'm starting to lean towards the latter. Update 2. After that creepy photo collage, I knew things were only going to escalate. The next step for me was to get some legal advice, just in case they followed through on their threats. I found a local attorney who specializes in family disputes and set up a consultation. I brought along all the evidence I had, the spreadsheet, the text messages, and even the ridiculous framed collage they sent. The lawyer barely glanced at the paperwork before saying the case had no legal standing. Parents can't retroactively charge their adult children for expenses that are part of basic upbringing. He explained that it's more of a scare tactic, likely aimed at making me cave in out of guilt. He suggested sending a cease and desist letter if the harassment continued. It was a relief to hear, but I knew my parents wouldn't back down so easily. And I was right. The very next day, I got called into a meeting with HR at work. My parents had contacted my employer. They told HR that I was in significant debt to them and hinted that I might be stealing from the company to pay it back. HR was confused, but they were also sympathetic. They asked if I was okay and if I needed any support. I was mortified, but assured them it was a personal family issue and had nothing to do with my job. They understood but advised me to keep them in the loop if my parents tried this again. Later that evening, I was sorting through some old boxes in my closet, trying to declutter and clear my mind. That's when I stumbled upon an old journal from when I was a teenager. I hadn't seen it in years. Flipping through the pages, I found entries where I had written about feeling like a financial burden. Even back then, my parents would complain about how much money they spent on me, making comments about the costs of school activities and clothes. It was surreal reading those words, almost like past me was warning present me that this was always going to be a problem. The next move for my parents was taking things public. They started posting on Facebook, airing our dirty laundry for all to see. My mom wrote this long, dramatic post about how they had given everything for their son, only for me to turn my back on them now that I'm successful. The comments section became a battleground. Some family members jumped in, saying they couldn't believe I would treat my parents this way, while others defended me, saying it was insane for them to demand money for raising me. My girlfriend suggested we move in together. She could see the toll this was taking on me, and she thought it would help if I put some physical distance between me and my parents. I agreed. We started looking at apartments that weekend. It felt like a huge step, but it also felt necessary. My parents were clearly not going to stop, and I needed to take back control of my life. Then came the threat of disownment. They called me and left a voicemail saying they were cutting me out of the will if I didn't start making payments. I actually laughed when I heard it because I know they don't have much to leave behind, just a house with a mortgage and a lot of credit card debt. It felt like a desperate move, like they were throwing everything they had left at me. In a surprising twist, my cousin reached out to me on Instagram. She told me that she went through something similar with her own parents a few years ago. They had demanded money after she got a high-paying job, too. Apparently, it's a common tactic in our family, pressure the successful kids to pay back imaginary debts. She offered her support and even shared some of the nasty messages she'd received back then. It was a huge relief to know I wasn't alone in this. The drama spread through the family like wildfire. I started getting calls and texts from various relatives. Some were on my side, saying they couldn't believe what my parents were doing. Others accused me of being selfish and ungrateful. It was exhausting, and it felt like every time I silenced one call, another popped up. It was causing a major rift in the family, with people choosing sides. In the middle of all this, my younger sibling called me, sounding terrified. They said our parents had already started dropping hints about how much they'd spent on their education and that they might be next. I assured them I wouldn't let that happen and told them to keep all their communication with our parents saved, just in case. That's when I decided to go no contact. I blocked their numbers, deleted them from my social media, and even removed my address from public records. It felt drastic, but it also felt like the only way to protect myself. I told my sibling what I was doing and urged them to do the same if things got worse. It didn't take long for them to show up at my apartment. I heard loud banging on my door one evening. My girlfriend peeked through the peephole and confirmed it was my parents. They were yelling my name, demanding I talk to them. I called the police. By the time they arrived, my parents were still there, now shouting about how I'd abandoned them after everything they'd done for me. The police asked them to leave, and thankfully they did, but not before my mom yelled something about how everyone would hear the truth about me. I updated Reddit after this, sharing what had happened and letting everyone know I'd gone no contact. The response was overwhelmingly supportive, with many people encouraging me to stand firm and not give in to their pressure. The fallout from the family has been a mixed bag. My inbox is flooded with messages, some full of support, others filled with guilt-tripping. It's clear my parents have been working overtime to paint me as the villain in this story. At this point, I've made my decision. I'm done playing their games. I'm focusing on my future, my relationship, and my own mental well-being. It's heartbreaking to cut them out, but it feels like the only choice I have left. I'm ready to start fresh, free from their manipulative grip. Update 3. Just when I thought things might be calming down, I got a message from my cousin. Apparently, my parents called an emergency family meeting and invited the entire extended family. The message made it clear I wasn't invited. They were framing it as a chance to discuss my betrayal and the family's future without me. It felt like some kind of intervention, but I decided to show up anyway. I needed to hear what they were saying behind my back, and I wasn't going to let them control the narrative. I arrived unannounced and walked into a room full of relatives. The look on my parents' faces when they saw me was priceless, pure shock. My mom tried to usher me out, whispering that I wasn't welcome, but I ignored her. I stood in front of everyone and calmly asked why they felt entitled to demand money from me. The room went silent as my parents launched into a sob story about sacrifice, how they'd put me through school and given up so much so I could succeed. I let them go on for a bit, nodding along like I was listening. Then I pulled out a binder I'd brought with me. Inside were printed copies of all the text messages, the absurd spreadsheet they'd sent, and notes from my lawyer. I laid everything out on the table for everyone to see. I didn't say a word, just pointed to the evidence. The room was dead silent as my aunts and uncles leaned in to read. My dad's face turned beet red, and my mom looked like she'd seen a ghost. The silence broke when my aunt, who had initially sided with my parents, started questioning them. She asked why they'd lied about the legal threats and the debts I supposedly owed. Several other relatives chimed in, saying they had no idea it was this extreme. The room erupted into a mix of shouting and whispers. Half the family took my side, clearly appalled by what they were seeing, while the other half still clung to my parents' sob story, unable to believe they'd lie about something like this. Then, out of nowhere, my dad lost it. He yelled, saying that they were counting on me to bail them out of their credit card debt and cover his gambling losses. It was like a bomb went off in the room. My mom's jaw dropped, and she started crying, accusing him of ruining everything. She blamed him for their financial mess, saying she had no idea how bad it was. It was clear their marriage was falling apart right in front of us. I just stood there, watching as the entire story unraveled. I left the meeting feeling a weird mix of vindication and sadness. On my way out, my cousin pulled me into a hug and whispered that she was proud of me for standing up for myself. I didn't realize how badly I needed to hear that. After the meeting, my parents went into full damage control mode on social media. They posted a series of vague, cryptic updates about family betrayal and being stabbed in the back. I ignored it, but my younger sibling couldn't stay silent. They commented on one of the posts, calling out our parents for their lies and manipulative behavior. It caused a huge argument in the comments section, with family members picking sides. A few days later, I got an official-looking letter from my parents' lawyer. It was a joke, completely unprofessional, and clearly a last-ditch effort to scare me into settling. I showed it to my lawyer, who just laughed. He said there was nothing to worry about and advised me to ignore it unless they escalated further. I had another therapy session shortly after. We went over everything that had happened, and my therapist pointed out that this wasn't just about the money, it was about control. My parents had always used manipulation and guilt to keep me under their thumb, and this was just the latest, most extreme example. The session was a turning point for me. I finally understood that going no contact wasn't just a temporary solution, it was a necessary step for my mental health. To my surprise, my aunt, the same one who had sided with my parents in the beginning, called to apologize. She admitted she'd been manipulated by their sob story and had no idea how bad things really were. She offered to help mediate, but I told her I was done trying to fix things with my parents. It felt like closure in a way, knowing she realized what was really going on. My younger sibling reached out again, saying they were going no contact too. They'd been quietly saving money in case our parents turned on them next. I was relieved but also heartbroken for them. At least they wouldn't have to go through this alone. Then, late one night, I noticed a car parked outside my apartment. It was there for hours, just sitting with the engine running. This happened a few nights in a row, and I had a gut feeling it was my parents trying to intimidate me. I filed a police report, just in case things got out of hand. Amid all this chaos, my girlfriend did something amazing. She booked a surprise weekend getaway for us, saying we needed to get away from the drama for a bit. We left the city for a few days, and it was the most relaxed I'd felt in months. On the last night of the trip, she proposed to me. It caught me completely off guard, but I said yes without hesitation. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to build a life free from all the toxicity. When we got back, I updated Reddit. I shared everything that had happened, including our engagement and our plans to move across the country for a new beginning. The response was overwhelming. People congratulated us and shared their own stories of going no contact with manipulative family members. It felt like I had a whole army of strangers rooting for us. Now we're focused on planning the move and starting our new life together. I never thought I'd be in this position, but here I am, ready to leave the past behind. Update 4. Moving day came faster than expected. My fiancé and I had everything packed and ready. The movers were loading up the last of our boxes, and it felt like we were finally closing this chapter. That's when my parents showed up unannounced. I spotted them as I was bringing out a final box. My dad had this fake, apologetic smile on his face, while my mom was already teary-eyed like they'd rehearsed the whole thing. They walked straight up to me, acting like nothing had happened. My mom said they'd forgiven me and that we could start fresh if I just came to my senses. My dad nodded along, trying to convince me that they were ready to let it all go. I didn't even bother responding. I stepped back, signaling the movers to continue, and they did. My fiancé stood beside me, keeping a firm grip on my hand. He leaned in and quietly told me we were leaving this behind, for good. When my parents realized I wasn't going to engage, they got more desperate. They started pleading, talking louder, trying to create a scene. One of the movers stepped in and politely asked them to move aside so they could finish up. My mom snapped, accusing the movers of tearing the family apart. That's when I turned away and walked back inside. I didn't look back, and neither did my fiancé. But of course, they didn't let it end there. The very next day, I got a call from my new boss. Apparently, my parents had somehow found out where I'd be working and called the company, telling them I was mentally unstable and that I had a history of stealing money. Thankfully, my boss was understanding. He assured me it wouldn't affect my job, but it was still embarrassing. It felt like they were trying to sabotage every step I took away from them. Then, something unexpected happened. I got a message from my estranged uncle. He hadn't been in contact with the family for years. He told me he'd left because of similar issues, manipulative parents who tried to control him with guilt and money. He shared his own stories of the nonsense he'd gone through, which sounded almost identical to what I was dealing with now. He offered to help me navigate the fallout and gave me advice on setting boundaries. It was a strange but welcome twist to have an ally I didn't even know I had. Meanwhile, my parents decided to escalate their legal threats. They hired a new lawyer, someone more aggressive, who sent me a formal letter demanding financial reimbursement for all the expenses they claimed to have paid throughout my life. The letter was full of legal jargon but essentially boiled down to the same ridiculous demand: pay them back or face a lawsuit. I forwarded it straight to my lawyer, who fired back with a sharp response, warning them that any further harassment would result in legal action on my end. The next thing I heard, my parents were telling anyone who would listen that they'd disinherited me and my sibling, and that their estate would go to charity instead. It was almost laughable because I knew their so-called estate was nothing more than a pile of debt and a rundown house. It felt like another desperate attempt to guilt us into submission. On the bright side, my future in-laws stepped in with open arms. They offered us their full support, even saying they'd help me and my sibling financially if we needed it. I was overwhelmed by their kindness. For the first time, I felt like I had a real family, one that wasn't trying to manipulate or control me. A few days later, I got a heartfelt letter from my younger sibling. They thanked me for standing up to our parents, admitting they'd felt trapped for years and didn't know how to break free. They said I'd shown them it was possible, and they were finally starting to see a way out. It was the most meaningful thing I've received in a long time. In therapy, I had a major breakthrough. I realized that my entire life had been shaped by my parents' manipulation. Every decision I'd made, every bit of guilt I'd felt, it all traced back to them. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I was free to decide who I wanted to be, without their influence weighing me down. Of course, my parents couldn't resist one last attempt at control. They sent me a long, desperate text, claiming they were on the verge of bankruptcy because of my refusal to pay them back. It was full of dramatic language, saying they'd lose everything because of me. I knew it was a lie. I didn't respond. The extended family is now completely divided. Some have gone no contact with my parents, while others still believe their sob story. It's caused a huge rift, but I've decided I'm okay with it. I can't control what other people think. Then, my sibling went public. They made a post on social media, sharing their own experiences of manipulation and abuse. It was raw and honest, and it quickly went viral within our family circle. More relatives reached out, some apologizing, others distancing themselves from my parents. It felt like a wave of validation, knowing that the truth was finally out there. For the first time in years, I've gone weeks without hearing from my parents. It's peaceful, almost surreal. My fiancé and I have started planning our wedding. We're keeping it small and intimate, inviting only the people who've truly supported us. It feels like the perfect way to start this new chapter of our lives. I posted a final update on Reddit, thanking everyone for their advice and support. I shared that we're moving forward and focusing on our future. I've learned that true family isn't about obligation or manipulation, it's about love and support, and I'm ready to leave the past behind. As a final note, I've started writing a memoir about my experiences. I'm hoping it will help others who've dealt with similar family dynamics. It's a painful story, but it's also one of growth and breaking free. If it can help even one person, it'll be worth it. Update 5. It's been a few months since we moved across the country, and it's been the most peaceful time of my life. My fiancé and I have settled into our new home, and for the first time, there's no constant anxiety hanging over us. I hadn't heard from my parents at all, so I thought maybe they'd finally given up. I should have known better. One morning, a package arrived with no return address. Inside, I found a stack of old family photos and a handwritten letter from my mother. The photos were from family vacations, birthdays, random moments from my childhood, every happy memory she could dig up. The letter was filled with lines like "Remember the good times" and "How could you abandon your family after everything we did for you?" It was classic guilt tripping, the kind I've grown used to. I didn't respond. I put the letter back in the box, shoved it in the back of a closet, and moved on. We decided to throw a small engagement party with just close friends and a few supportive family members. Everything was going great, good food, lots of laughs, and for once, I felt like I was surrounded by people who truly cared about me. That's when my phone started buzzing nonstop with texts from unknown numbers. I glanced at it and immediately recognized the tone. My parents had somehow found out about the party. The messages ranged from "We should have been invited" to "You're ruining the family name." It was like they were trying to crash the party from miles away. I blocked the numbers, put my phone on silent, and went back to enjoying the night. I wasn't going to let them ruin this for me. A week later, my lawyer contacted me with unexpected news. My parents had officially filed a small claims case against me, demanding $50,000 for unpaid parental debts. The amount was much lower than their original demand of $200,000, but it was still absurd. It felt like they were testing the waters, seeing if I'd finally give in. I met with my lawyer and we started preparing for court. We compiled everything: text messages, the insane spreadsheet, notes from their calls to my employer. We were ready for whatever nonsense they planned to throw at us. The day of the hearing was a mix of nerves and anticipation. My parents showed up putting on quite the performance. They were dressed in dark, somber clothes, acting as if they were the victims in all this. My mom had tissues in her hand before the hearing even started. They were clearly trying to paint me as the heartless child who'd abandoned them. I stayed quiet, letting my lawyer do the talking. He laid out the evidence, methodically going through each piece. I watched as my parents' confident expressions started to crack. The judge listened patiently before asking them why they'd demand repayment for things like diapers, school supplies, and family vacations. My mom tried to spin another sob story about all the sacrifices they'd made, but the judge wasn't having it. They cut her off, calling the case absurd, and saying it appeared to be a clear form of harassment. The verdict was swift, case dismissed with prejudice. My parents wouldn't be able to refile. As we left the courtroom, my dad pulled me aside for one last attempt at manipulation. He leaned in close and said, "You'll regret this when we're gone. You're all we have." I didn't flinch. I looked him in the eye and said, "No, I'm not." Then I turned and walked away, without looking back. It felt like I'd finally closed a door I'd been trying to shut for years. I made the decision to change my phone number and wipe all traces of my contact information from public records. I told my lawyer to handle any future attempts at contact. For the first time, I felt like a weight had been lifted. It was like cutting the last thread, tying me to all the chaos. A few weeks later, we had our wedding. It was a small, intimate ceremony, exactly what we wanted. My younger sibling was there, along with a handful of close friends and my fiance's family. There was no drama, no unexpected guests, just love and support from everyone around us. During the reception, my sibling gave a toast. They thanked me for being brave enough to stand up to our parents, for breaking the cycle of manipulation that had trapped us for so long. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. It was the first time in years I felt truly at peace. After the wedding, we went on a month-long honeymoon. We traveled to places I'd always dreamed of visiting, places I'd never thought I'd get to see while I was still caught in my parents' web. It felt symbolic, like we were starting a new life, far away from all the toxicity. During the trip, I got an email from my mother. It was the first contact in months and simply read, "We forgive you. We forgive you. We hope one day you'll forgive us too." I read it once, deleted it, and blocked the email address. I realized I didn't need closure from them. I'd already found it on my own terms. Now I'm back home, starting a new job and settling into our first home as a married couple. I made a final post on Reddit, thanking everyone who supported me throughout this entire ordeal. I shared how I'm moving forward with my life and focusing on my future. I've learned that true family isn't about obligation or manipulation, it's about love and mutual respect. I'm considering writing a memoir about my experience, hoping it might help others who've dealt with similar family dynamics. I ended the post with a piece of advice. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't letting go of your family, it's accepting that they were never truly there for you to begin with. But once you do, you can finally start living for yourself. That's where I am now, living for myself, and for the first time, it feels like enough.